This episode of the podcast is brought to you by LeafWell. Hello, listeners of Cannabinoid Connect. Have you ever thought about getting a medical cannabis card? The process can be intimidating and difficult to navigate, to say the least. That's why I've partnered with LeafWell, the easiest and most affordable way to get a medical card in Texas and in 32 other states in the US. LeafWell seamlessly connects you to a network of doctors that will help you get certified online in minutes. LeafWell is run by data scientists, cannabis specialists, and patient advocates that are passionate about increasing access and education around medical cannabis use. LeafWell's patient support team is also there to support you throughout your entire journey using medical cannabis. As I mentioned, I've partnered with LeafWell to provide all my listeners with a discount to become certified for medical cannabis. Simply go to their website at leafwell.com and use the promo code CCTX to receive $15 off the price of getting a medical card. Again, that's leafwell.com. Use the promo code CCTX to receive $15 off the price of getting a medical cannabis card. LeafWell only charges if you get approved. So what do you have to lose? Visit leafwell.com today. Use the promo code CCTX to get certified for medical cannabis, risk-free. Shelby Hartman, welcome back.
Thanks for having me.
Of course, it's a pleasure. Really excited to have you on again and to talk about, quite frankly, the traction that I'm seeing DoubleBlind really having in the psychedelic community, but also within the cannabis community as well. I mean, it's really amazing the content that you're putting out, and I look forward to diving into it more because I really think what you're doing is differentiated. But for the audience's purposes, I want to first start with you, Shelby. I recently read, I think it was a New York Times article talking about a recent gathering that y'all hosted in Cuyama Valley in California. But, one thing that really stuck out to me, and then, of course, we can get into that actual event, was how you were talking about how ayahuasca really helped, and this is what, I don't think this was your exact words, but it helped like rewire your brain in a way to help you focus more, because I think that was something that you struggled with early on. So you want to talk a little bit about that experience and, what led you to where you're at now, which is the co-founder and CEO of DoubleBlind?
Sure, yeah. So the reporter, Sam Kestenbaum, was asking us to describe moments that we've had on psychedelics that have transformed our lives or how psychedelics have impacted our lives. I can't remember the exact question, but I was basically trying to give him an example of how psychedelics can work on a almost like invisible or intangible level to shift the way that a person feels or thinks. Because I think a lot of times when people ask, like, why are you doing what you're doing, or how have psychedelics changed your life, they expect like a very concrete, comprehensible answer, like, oh, well, I was drinking too much and now I don't drink too much. Or, oh, I realized like I was in a toxic relationship and then I exited that toxic relationship. And sometimes psychedelics do give very clear directives, but a lot of times they work on a much more subtle level. And so that particular example, I was referring to a ceremony that I was sitting in the Amazon at the Temple of the Way of Light, which is outside of Iquitos, Peru. And I was sitting in a ceremony with 5+ Shipibo elder maestras. And one of the things that pieces of advice that they always gave me and the other women, it was a women's ceremony, was concentrarse. They would always say, like, concentrarse, concentrarse, as sort of like a directive. Concentrarse, which means focus, concentrate, which is sort of like a directive as to how to approach the medicine. And they were saying it in the context of paying attention to the Ikaro, or the songs that they sing in ceremony. And so essentially, the first night that I was at this retreat, I was having a really hard time focusing, and I was just kind of all over the place. And it was just what do they call it, like rat race mind. And it
Right.
was a very overwhelming experience. So then the second night I was like, okay, my intention is like concentrarse. And so as I was sitting in ceremony and the maestras were singing, I was really just trying to put all of my focus onto the melodies that they were singing. And that was when I felt like, it's very hard to explain, but again, it was almost like my brain was kind of clicking into place, like the gauges on a clock. And essentially the medicine said to me, like, this is how you focus, like this is what it means to focus. And from the time that I was a kid, I always had a really hard time focusing. My teachers thought that I had ADHD at one point. And it's again, it's just so hard to explain how these experiences actually feel if you haven't had it before, but that was
Right.
sort of what happened to me.
No, I mean it makes sense. The way you put it is really good. That click moment, right? It's like when you're a kid and like say you're learning how to ride a bike, and then that one time when you finally like are getting motion, the wheels are going, and you're starting to pedal like simultaneously as it's all happening. I don't know if you felt that, but I mean, there's that the registers, right? Whatever it is, you're like, oh, I got it now. I know how to do that. So in a way, I see exactly what you're saying. It kind of was like, hey, Shelby, this is kind of how your brain works or how you focus basically. And you kind of you felt that feeling in a way, right? I mean, and from
Right,
there
right.
it translates and it carries over and you can apply it in other situations. And that's what I think is really amazing about Double Blind. So, first I want to say thank you for number 7, issue 7. Maria Sabina is on the cover there. She's the mother of psilocybin, basically, right? Of mushrooms. Is that?
Right. Yeah,
Yeah.
so actually, we did put Maria Sabina on one of the covers. I think it was issue 5. That particular cover is not Maria Sabina. That is a healer from Eastern Europe who's a whisperer. Um,
Oh, well,
but
my mistake.
they,
My
yeah.
apologies. Okay.
I don't know, all good, all good. But yeah, I'm happy to tell you that story. I'm also happy to talk to you about Maria Sabina. So whatever you feel
Tell
called
me
for
about
me
tell me
to address.
about the woman here on issue 7 then. Yeah, tell me her story.
So I can't remember her name, but essentially, whisperers are this kind of dying breed of healer in Eastern Europe. And they practice a lot of folklore. They use plant medicine. And the reason that, and we found this really gorgeous photo essay of whisperers engaging in these practices, as well as them sort of, and then we put an article with it where they're talking about how more and more like the traditions of being a whisperer are dying because traditionally whisperers haven't really charged for their services, and like the younger generations aren't really wanting to step into this. This is like a trajectory, so to speak, because it's not a real career path. And for us, like this was a really interesting story for a few reasons. Like, firstly, a lot of times when we think about sort of like traditional healers, we think about, for example, the Shipibo in the Amazon who are serving ayahuasca, or we might think about like the Huichols in Mexico who have been doing peyote ceremonies for more than 10,000 years. But we oftentimes forget about the fact that there actually are traditional healers, and that many of the sort of practices that they've stewarded for generations are dying all around the world in countries all around the world. And so we kind of want to challenge this idea or this narrative that traditional healing and plant medicines only come from one particular region, or that a healer has to look a particular way. So that's why we thought it was interesting to feature this particular group of primarily women, although some men are whisperers as well. Yeah, and what was I going to say? I was going to say something else about this. I can't remember. It'll come
I
back to me.
I see why you're doing it though, right? It's trying kind of to like revive or at least generate increased awareness from this legacy practice and tradition that is now kind of like you said dying off because the younger generations aren't seeing um it as a career path or something that's kind of sustainable from a monetary perspective. So what's
Right.
happening? Is there any kind of movement or have you seen anything that's taken place since publishing that story? And Has there been more interest generated, or what has been the conversation around that topic?
Yeah, unfortunately, I'm not aware of, a really strong movement to preserve the traditions around the whispers. There are some groups that we highlighted in the story that are essentially trying to do kind of like a tourism thing around whispers to revive the industry, but or the not the industry, the tradition. But yeah, the writer I think said there's like less than 100 whispers that she's aware of that still exist.
Wow. What what is your consumer base look like? I mean, are these really savvy, experienced people within the psychedelic community? Is it a mix of people who are curious and wanting to learn more about how this could be a therapeutic alternative? What is the circulation look like?
Yeah, I mean, we get many hundreds of thousands of people on the website each month. I can't remember what our traffic is off the top of my head. But we're one of the most highly trafficked websites on psychedelics in the world. Our print magazine has a circulation of 7,500, which is pretty good actually for an indie print mag.
Yeah.
And our audience is very much split depending on if you look at people who are coming to our website, many of whom come through Google because they're just searching things like how long do shrooms last, and then they like find our article and come to us through that. So we get a lot of beginners coming to our website who literally are just trying to have a psychedelic experience and don't really know where to turn for reliable information on how to begin, versus the people who engage with our magazine, I would say, are oftentimes more kind of like hardcore double blind fans, and a lot of folks who have had, 12 or more psychedelic experiences and really think of themselves as people who are on a psychedelic journey, oftentimes for life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's like you got something for everyone to that point, because like you even have, I was amazed to see there's even like what online courses where if you want to learn how to microdose or grow mushrooms, those classes are available. And then even as niche of a topic as like, okay, if you want to combine smoking cannabis with tripping in a psychedelic experience, right? Like, what does that entail? How should you do it properly? Um, and I don't see anyone else doing that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that for us, you know, everything comes from a place of, well, it comes from two places, the things we do. One, what do people want and need from us? And originally we set out to just be a print magazine, but it became very clear as we started just putting out content on our Instagram and stuff that there are tons of people out there who really wanted and needed support on their journey with psychedelics, and they were looking for education. And so that whole pillar of our business with like the courses and the webinars and the classes, that wasn't something that we set out to do originally. We're journalists by trade,
Right. There's an
but it was something
appetite
that we
for it
decided,
though.
there was
Yeah.
an appetite for it. So it's something that we decided to do just because we felt like it was important. And then we also do stuff because it's just aligned with our values and it lights us up. So like the journalism piece, engaging in critical conversations about the forthcoming psychedelic industry, raising awareness about, the difference between decriminalization and legalization, and talking about Indigenous stewardship. Like these are all things that just really matter to us because we come out of cannabis reporting and we saw what happened in the cannabis industry, where a lot of the original pioneers in the industry got locked out because of too much regulation, and folks are still incarcerated for possession and selling of cannabis when other people are making millions of dollars off of it. Like it's actually kind of a regulatory disaster, to be honest. So like
Totally.
we don't want to see the same we don't want to see the same mistakes made in psychedelics, and we think that journalism is going to play a really important role in making sure that hopefully things are done, I don't want to say right this time because there's always going to be mistakes, but better and with more intention.
Right. Well, I mean, it seems like, and it's been echoed on this podcast, that psychedelics are really taking a fast track when it comes, like, compared to where cannabis is at in terms of, proving the medicinal and therapeutic value. And there's a lot of anecdotal evidence for cannabis, and there are more peer-reviewed studies that are being published. But it seems like the psychedelic industry is just completely double down on the medical aspect. And you're seeing it in mainstream media. I mean, I was in New Mexico a couple of weeks ago and just sitting on the couch in my parents' CBS Sunday Morning, they're talking about microdosing and psilocybin and how it can treat addiction and address other ailments. And so being a society where mental health we're at a crisis at this point. I know that you also, Double Blind also, like, hosts events and summits, like, specifically around trauma, even sex and psychedelics. So, I mean, tell us a little bit about your recent trauma summit and the connection between individuals and the communal aspect and healing overall with this plant-based medicines.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think that one of the things we're most interested in at Double Blind, and we talk about this a little bit in the editor's letter for issue 8, which is just being sent out now, actually, but is that we want to encourage people to have bigger conversations. And what I mean by that is that, in the mainstream media, we continue to see a growing conversation around the potential of psychedelics for mental health. And that is great. And at the same time, there is so much more nuance to the psychedelic experience and also what it means to engage with psychedelics. Psychedelics are not just, synthetic compounds to be pharmaceuticalized and patented and sold in the context of like a clinical setting. They are plants that have and fungi that have been used for thousands of years by indigenous people, and we wouldn't even continue to know about the wisdom contained within these plants if it wasn't for the stewards of these medicines. And so, this is just kind of a roundabout way of, I'll bring it back to the trauma summit and to say that currently, like, MDMA is being investigated for post-traumatic stress disorder, right? And that's something we've read about a lot in the news, including in the New York Times and other mainstream outlets. But when I say let's have bigger conversations, our understanding in the psychedelic community and among a lot of indigenous communities as well is that, trauma is much broader than just people who are diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder, according to like the DSM, the Diagnostic Statistical Manual that's put out by the American Psychological Association. Trauma, there is sort of this hypothesis among a lot of people who work in psychedelics that mental health diagnoses in and of themselves are overly simplistic. Why is it that a plant medicine, the same medicine, ayahuasca, psilocybin, would show promise for not just depression, but also anxiety, substance use disorder, even just like a lack of feeling like you don't have meaning or purpose in your life? It's because hypothetically, they're all getting at something that's actually underneath the diagnosis. And it's not about the diagnosis. It's about like the underlying traumas, whether that be intergenerational trauma that comes from your lineage, whether that be systemic trauma that actually manifests in a diagnosis, if that makes sense. So the diagnosis is the symptom and the trauma is the underlying condition. And so that's really what the summit was all about. It was like, let's have bigger conversations about what is actually going on here with this mental health crisis that we're now facing in our culture.
Yeah, that's an important conversation to have, and something that should be addressed up front. And in traditional healthcare, especially in the United States today, it doesn't seem like we go that route, right? It's like we see what's wrong, or we identify the problem, and then we manage the problem through prescriptions or what have you, that really don't get to the heart of, like, treating or healing, right? And so was that well received? Was that hard to, or was that difficult for some to kind of comprehend? Because when you talk about, lineage and genetics, I mean, yeah, alcoholism is apparent in some families, right? I mean, there's other things. So how is that received at the summit?
I mean, I was honestly really blown away by the summit. I was nervous about it. It was just for a little more context. It was basically a series of virtual panels, and the first one was looking at the promise of psychedelics to heal trauma in the brain and how that actually works, what we know and don't know about that. The second was talking about how trauma lives in the body and how we actually expel trauma from the body. And then the third was looking at systemic trauma, like the potential of psychedelics for healing the trauma of racism and the trauma of essentially being a part of any community that's historically been marginalized and continues to be systemically oppressed in the United States and elsewhere. And people were just really blown away by the conversations. I mean, I know that we're all in a culture right now of being inundated with information, and people just glaze over and they scroll on their Instagram and they barely engage with anything in a meaningful way. But I do feel like, we had some really important conversations and people valued it a lot.
That's great. Yeah. And I mean, all that stuff is like, it's content. If it's virtual, like it's always, you can replay it. Like it's evergreen, right? It's beneficial. So, um, no, that's great. Another event, and I, briefly touched on it when we first started this episode, but it's, the one that you hosted in Cuyama Valley in California. I think it's called Mycoglia. Is that right?
Oh my gosh, I know. I will never be forgiven for choosing a name that is so hard to pronounce. Don't feel bad. Nobody can pronounce it. We jokingly call it Michael Ajaya on the Double Blind team.
I literally went to a pronunciation website before this podcast to like get it down so I still butchered
it. Yeah, well, there's nobody knows. So it can't be butchered. But yeah, so we did a music festival in it's in northern Santa Barbara County. It's like 2 hours from Los Angeles in June. And yeah, it was just a beautiful, beautiful event. And if I'm being perfectly honest about it, we lost so much money on it, even though we sold out. And even though it was amazing, because events are so expensive. And until we get to the point where we can have a festival that's like 5,000 plus people, like it's not going to be, and it's not going to be like we're not doing it for the money. And we didn't do it for the money. But as a small independent magazine, I'm just not sure that we can really afford the time and the effort and the money at this stage for doing an event of that scale. I mean, it was in the middle of the desert and we had to bring so much stuff. I was like, talking with porta potty guys and freaking figuring out menus. And
you don't want to repeat a fire festival. So yeah, I get
right,
it.
Exactly. So it was an incredible event in the end. And I think like the reason we wanted to do it is because we do live in this weird virtual world, especially since COVID, where we've built this really beautiful community online of people who we feel so connected to. But at the end of the day, like we've never really gotten to properly drop in with them. And so to just be in community together, sitting around the fire, dancing, swimming, smoking weed, like it was a really beautiful experience. And I would love to make it happen again. But we'll just have to see how that, figure that all out logistically.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, that's what it's all about, right? I mean, like you try something and then if it doesn't work out at that time, you revisit it later when you're ready. And so, but I applaud you for doing it and congratulations on the success that you had because it sounds like it was a great event and people had a good time. So, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, tell me, Shelby, what's the future of Double Blind? I mean, we talked about pretty much throughout this episode is, the traction that psychedelics are seeing and how fast they're moving, even within mainstream media in terms of the curiosity and even the efficacy around all the different things that it's helping to treat. So where does Double Blind play in this burgeoning sector?
Yeah, I mean, I think first and foremost, we want to just have the privilege to keep doing what we've been doing, which is to put out the magazine, make it better and better each time, grow the circulation of the magazine in a way that feels, heart centered. We don't want to be in Barnes and Noble, stuck behind every Men's Health and Cooking Light on planet Earth. Um, and, keep putting out journalism on our website. We'd love to have the resources to do more hard-hitting investigative journalism. That's what I have my background in. But, again, it takes a ton of resources to do that kind of reporting. We also have a whole list of documentary and podcast ideas. So we're excited to get into the realm of multimedia reporting. I definitely see some TV shows and documentaries in our future. So excited to just keep it going.
Nice. Yeah, definitely do a podcast. That would be I mean, yeah, the more we can get the word out for, the psychedelic industry and the cannabis industry, because really, in my view, the real gap is the understanding and the education around these plants, right? And like what they can do. And I mean, particularly in cannabis, like I've said this before, we're such an ally driven generation, which is a good thing. But I think if there was more understanding of cannabis and its potential, and then of course psychedelics as well, I mean, there's underlying issues that these plant medicines also address, right? Like you said, systemic racism and other issues that everyone is passionate about, addressing at this point. So y'all are doing a great job. I really enjoy
Thank you.
the publication. I can't wait till issue 8 comes out. You said that'll be out soon. So
Yeah, we're literally just mailing it to subscribers this week. So I'm sure you're getting a copy as well. I don't know. You would have to
nice.
talk to Zoe, but
I should. Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
If not, I'll be on the website. But Shelby, I really appreciate your time. Where can people find Double Blind's website, social media, all that good stuff so that they can learn more and subscribe as well?
Yeah, so we're doubleblindmag.com, which is where we have our articles, and you can get a copy of the magazine. And then we're also at Double Blind Mag on all the platforms: Twitter, TikTok, YouTube, Facebook, Instagram. Probably forgetting something, but
You nailed all the big ones. You got those.
okay. Sweet.
Awesome. Well, hey, I really appreciate your time. Let's definitely uh make it a third time, as Double Blind continues to grow and evolve in this ever exciting industry.
Thank you so much for your time.
Yes, thank you. And thank you all for listening. Bye.